Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you.
Welcome to Terrace Park.
Welcome to Terrace Park Church. Welcome to Terrace Park. Welcome to Terrace Park.
Welcome to Terrace Park Church of God.
Welcome y'all to Terrace Park.
Are you excited to be here? Hey, good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday night Bible study. Most of you know I'm Pastor Scott, and this is Terrace Park Church of God. We've been going through chronologically through the Bible, and this week we are in Daniel chapter 6. I when you think of Daniel, I think perhaps maybe the most famous thing you think of Daniel is not the latter days predictions and prophecies, the eschatology. It's not how he dealt with the different kings and stuff. And most people envision Daniel in chapter 6, which is he gets thrown into the den of lions. And I titled this Bible study tonight, Sovereign Even in the Den. And I just sort of want to put you sort of like thinking about this thought is that when is God not sovereign? In other words, I think one thing that we miss about Daniel is that his whole life is really tragic in many ways. I mean, he was exiled from his country. He's a eunuch. So he everybody knows what a eunuch is. I don't have to describe that. He's a slave. He's in occupied territory. There's a lot of people that dislike him. And yet we are given this image of this man that never falls away from God. And it really is a theme in the Bible. I mean, we just got done with Job, and we could say same thing about Job. There's so many things that Job went through in his lifetime, but he never, as his wife had suggested, Job's wife suggested, you should just curse God and die. He never did that. And the same with Daniel. I mean, he had many reasons to give up on God. Many reasons to say, God don't care about me. I'm not doing it. And I think when we read these, one of the things that we must be willing to do is say, okay, I have a lot of things going on in my life. I've had a lot of unfair things happen. But can I find that same, it's beyond faith. I mean, it is faith. I mean, I don't mean it's not faith, but it's beyond that and saying, no matter what is going on around me, God is still going to be the answer in my life to everything. And I think often, as I said a couple weeks ago, people are waiting for you to lose your religion. They're just waiting. There's no way that they can go through this. And I think Daniel sort of can fortify us a little bit, and we can somewhat commiserate with how Daniel's life went, and then sort of say, well, I can live like that too. But what I wanted you to sort of be thinking about is what is your den of lions? What is that place where your faith is going to be tested. Maybe you're going through that at this moment. Maybe you've just been through it. Maybe you see it coming. But what, where, why, how does your den occur? And I would suggest to you, you can tell that you're in the den if you ask the question, is God truly sovereign? Is God truly in control? In verse 3, it says, then this Daniel, and it had described Daniel in verses 1 and 2, and I was going to read that, but I got a feeling that I'm going to run long, so I'm going to try to not run long tonight. So it talks about Daniel, how he was a governor over the local rulers, and there was only 3 governors, so he's a very important guy. And then of the governors, he's one of the favorites. And it said, and that's what we read in 3, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps, that's the local leaders, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So, I mean, he was so important to the king. The king thought about, hey, I'm just going to make you ruler over everything, and then the only person you answer to is me. And I thought about that a little bit, and what we're going to find in the very next verse is that, you know, sometimes when we are sort of up here and everything is going well and we're having great success, that it breeds in others envy and hatred. They don't understand why you get to be successful and they don't. And we read in verse 4, it says, so the governors and the satraps, I don't know how to pronounce that word, by the way, local rulers, sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Again, it's remarkable to me that a man that's a captive, that has went through all that he's went through, is in a foreign land, is being, does not have his own freedom, has been physically changed, that they could not find any flaw in him. Again, see a little bit of the parallel of Job, where in the parable of Job, or not the parable, but the story of Job, God says, can you find any better than Job? And if you're reading verse 4 and verse 3, I think what the writer of Daniel, who I don't know who that is, I don't think it's Daniel, but I don't know who it is. I probably should as a pastor, but I don't. But it's almost the same thing. Who could be better than Daniel? Look at this guy. He's great. He's went through a lot, but he's risen up through the ranks, and he's become a governor of governors. And there's no sin in him. There's no flaw in him. And his enemies who envied him and hated him could not find an issue. Don't you find that remarkable? Verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So they see a way to trap him. And that same trap is often used today by many. If they can't suppress you because you're living a hypocritical, unrighteous life. If you live a hypocritical, unrighteous life, they're not going to suppress you because there's nothing to attack. But if they cannot suppress you, if the enemy cannot take his minion and suppress you because of how you are living, then the next step is to attack what you believe and who you serve. And you see that so often today. I mean, how many times, especially in the, now, you wouldn't see this 30 years ago when I was growing up, but especially now, how often are Christians shamed into believing that they're horrible people because they believe in God and they trust in God? I mean, how many of you even have been at work and somebody asks, are you a Christian or not? And you're like, man, I don't know if I should say yes or no because of all the condemnation that's going to be heaped upon me. Or you're at school, you're at college, or even sometimes in your own family, it's like, hey, you should be ashamed that you believe in God. Am I off base there? I don't think so. I think today there is, I remember in the presidential primaries, there was a particular man who was telling Christians they should be ashamed of themselves for what they believe. And he said he understood the Bible better than they did. And so there's this, okay, well, if we can't attack the person, let's attack what they believe, let's attack who they believe in, who they trust in. And so these governors start to say, well, let's attack this law that he follows. And so in verse 6 it says, so these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. Now you may not believe this to be true, and there is a modern proverb that would suggest it's not true, but I will tell you, flattery will get you somewhere sometimes. They were flattering Darius. They were trying to lift him up and say how wonderful a king that he is, and we just think that you're marvelous, Darius, and you're the greatest king ever. And they were flattering him. And often flattery is welcomed. I mean, if you walk in and they say, well, that shirt fits well on you, you're like, okay, well, great, thanks. Appreciate that. I like that new haircut. Thank you. That makes me feel good. But way too often, flattery is not free. That it has this price tag attached to it that has to be paid, that is greater than the temporary emotional uplift that flattery can provide. So they're buttering him up is what we used to say, right? They're buttering him up so that they can set him up. And they plan on setting Daniel up by setting Darius up. In verse 7, all the governors of the kingdom and the administrators and the satraps, the counselors, the advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So they said how wonderful you are. Now they said, look, we think that we should write this law that says if anybody worships anything other than you, that they should be sent into the den of lions to be killed. And what they're really saying, and it's a theme of the Bible, right? What they're really saying is Darius, and they may not really believe this, but this is what they're saying. Darius, we believe you are God. That there's nothing greater than you, Darius. And we want to write a law that says that there's nothing greater than you. And that you are sovereign over everything. And if somebody doesn't believe that, we're going to kill them. And this law codifies this idea to the point where if anybody's words or actions deviates from this understanding that he is God, that Darius is the moral, physical, sovereign God, if anybody has words or actions, they're going to put them to death. But that same question, there's this term that you learn in seminary. It's called a motif, and I like to think of it as a thread. There's these threads that run all through the Bible, and one of those threads is this question: who is greater than God? That's what's being really asked right now. In Daniel chapter 6, the question really becomes who is greater than God? Could Darius be greater than God? And just so that you know, there are so many times it happens in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Like, for example, when Pharaoh and Moses are squared off, that was a battle between two men, but one of them thought he was God. And the question that was going to be answered by the plagues was, who is greater than God? The same is true when you talk about Saul, King Saul. Was he greater than God? There was this pushing back and forth of that. The same was true with Solomon. I have so much wisdom. Does that make me greater than God? And even in the book of Job that we just got done reading, really, if you pull that thread through there, what you're going to see is that the answer in 42 was, there is no one greater than God. But that's what's being tested here again. And it's tested in other instances in the Old Testament. It's tested in the New Testament. It's tested in early history of the Christian church. It's tested today. The question that many of us have to answer is, who is greater than God? If you want to survive the den of your life, the place where you will either die physically, spiritually, or mentally, if you want to survive that, then you have to answer the question, who is greater than God? And then it should be, no one is greater than God. And over again, in each one of these tests, it's the same thing. Somebody thinks they're greater than God, and then they're not. They're proven not. In the Pharaoh's case, plague after plague after plague, until the point where he just breaks down, and there's just no way that he could think that he was even a god anymore. You understand, pharaohs were gods in their eyes. But today, that question is asked over and over to you as a Christian, as a non-Christian. Who is greater than God? Is cancer greater than God? Is the President of the United States greater than God? And you could go on and on. Is your pastor greater than the God? The answer is no. No one is. And I believe that Daniel 6 has more importance in that understanding than it ever does whether or not the lion's jaws stay open or closed. It is an understanding of, can we answer the question, who is greater than God? Verse 8, now, O king, established a decree. So these guys are like, hey, we wrote this. We're saying you're greater than God. We're saying you're greater than anything, that you're sovereign. Just pass this law. And you know how great you are, don't you, king? I could just hear them buttering him up, right? It's like watching some people when they go to the movie theater and they get their their popcorn and they start to pump the butter. I mean, it's like slathering all over the popcorn, and there's like maybe 2 or 3 ounces just sitting on the bottom of the popcorn, and it's just everywhere, and you can't even hardly touch it because it's so buttery. Well, that's how Darius must have felt with the flattery. It goes on in 8, it says, "Now, O king, establish the decree, sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius, being all buttered up, sort of high on himself, signed the written decree." He let them bait him into believing that he was greater than God. Now, I would suggest to you that what you have to be careful with in today's society, out of one side of their lips, they are going to make you feel like you're greater than God. And then as soon as they do that and get you set, then they will tell you how horrible you are. You see it all the time in sports. He's the greatest quarterback of all time, blah, blah, blah. He does this. 3 weeks later, I don't think he'll ever be any good at all. He's the most horrible quarterback I've ever seen. He may be worse than a 5th grade quarterback. And, they try to make him into gods so that they can tear him down. What society wants is this ability that they tear down all gods so that somebody doesn't think that there could be this one and only God. And that's what happens over and over again. Don't let them butter you up to believe that you're some kind of God that has this ability to live without the one and only God. But that's what Darius does. Now, Darius is not a Christian. Darius is not a person that believes in God at this point. But he signs it in the law. But then we read verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in the upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed, gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. See, there was no question in Daniel's heart. There was no one greater than God. He was not going to bow to Darius. He was not going to elevate Darius above God. And I think one of the things that you have to admire about Daniel is this. It's easy. Like here, let me just, you at home and even people in the sanctuary right now, it's easy for you to say these words. Say them with me. God is sovereign. Right? You can say that easily. God is sovereign. Right? Easy to say. But do you live it out like Daniel lives it out? Do you live your life where God is in control? You see, that's the thing about Daniel that's so that you must admire, knowing that it's going to be an issue, know that he's going to break the law, knowing that he could die from it. His actions still say what he can say with his lips, he can live out. And I will suggest to you today, we have a lot of people that can speak, can sing these wonderful hymns and songs that God is almighty and God is sovereign. But then when push comes to shove, God is no longer in control somehow. But Daniel, he was still believing that God was in control. I'm not going to read 11 to 15, but just a quick paraphrase. So all his enemies see him praying. They knew they would. There's Daniel. We knew he would be praying over there. Probably if they'd have had a iPhone 13 or something like that, they'd have been videoing him and putting it on Facebook. But as soon as they saw that, they ran to the king to tattletale. Hey Darius, there's somebody that's praying to somebody other than you. It's Daniel. Can you believe it's Daniel? Thought you liked that guy. And the bad part was, based off the Mede and Persian laws, Darius could not unwrite the law after he realized that it was going to affect Daniel. The answer, does Darius care about Daniel? The answer is yes, he does. There's no doubt about that. Darius respects Daniel, but he's now hamstrung. His hands are tied, and he has to fulfill that law. So in verse 16 it says, "So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel," now hear this in a question, even though it looks like a statement. "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you," right? Darius is like, man, if this God that you serve, man, surely he'll take care of it. And Darius can't sleep at night, and he comes in the next day, and he runs down to the place and it's into the den, and he says, "When he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?'" And then the Sunday school Bible verse that we have read so many times. Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." It goes on in 23 and says, and I think this is an important part of understanding this, "Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in God." Sometimes you may ask yourself, why must I act out my beliefs? Why are they so important? And I will tell you, a lot of times when you are in that den of despair and death and hopelessness, that there are people around you that do not know God, or at least do not know the answer. Who is greater than God? That for the first time ever, they're going to recognize that God is sovereign, that God is in control, that God is greater than all these issues. And for Darius, it was like eye-opening. He's like, "I cannot believe this. You're alive." I mean, he is so fired up afterwards. And I didn't want to read this part, but he slaughters those people that tricked him. Back in the day, that's what kings did, I guess. But I mean, he was so fired up. I mean, he did horrible things to him. But then after that, here's what he read. Here's what he said, and it's written down. And so he must have wrote it into some kind of annals or something like that. It starts in verse 25. And I close with this reading, and then maybe just a thought afterwards. "To all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in the heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? Why do we have dens? Why do we struggle with our lions? When we are able to answer, who is greater than God? No one. Others will see that also. There are so many people today that are wrestling with, well, who is greater than my God? And maybe their God is heroin, or their God is alcohol, or their God is sex, or their God is just any idol. And they're saying, well, who is greater? And they see your God working in your life and recognize that he is greater than all these things. I was telling John and Scott before the service, I've been thinking about doing some kind of witness thing where we have people come up and witness, and you'd be amazed where people would say, you know, God was bigger than my cancer. God was bigger than my diagnosis. God was bigger than this person that was hating me. God was bigger than my own hate for myself. God was bigger than alcohol. God was bigger than the drugs in my life. God was bigger than anything. And what I believe is that just like Daniel, when we not only can proclaim that God is sovereign, but we can act out that there is no one greater than him, that he is awesome, that he is all powerful, that he is the solution to everything. That when we do that, we not only solidify ourselves in understanding our love for God and his love for us, but we start to mirror that out to others and reflect that out to others, where they will start to feel that same passion for God and say, where can I find him? In the New Testament, we're in Sunday night, we're in John, the book of John, and one of the things they say often as disciples, and Jesus says it too, is they'll say, well, who is this man? And all they'll say is, come and see. And see, when our actions meet our words, what we're really saying is, come and see. Who is greater than God? Come and see. Watch him work in my life. You know, if you think my life is perfect now, well, you should have seen it 20 years ago. It's not perfect now. Come and see him work in my life. Come and see that he is greater. He is greater than anything that can be thrown at you. Well, that's all I have for tonight. Keep praying for me. I'm still struggling with this sinus thing. Just got me beat down a little bit. Maybe this is my den right now, is can I trust him even when I'm not feeling good? You know, I just ask that if you're struggling with that answer, who is greater than God? Read some of these great stories in the Bible. Continue to Bible study. You'll find over and over again that answer. And the answer is no one, no thing is greater than God. Have a blessed day. We'll see you tomorrow at prayer meeting. No Zoom meeting afterwards. God bless.